8:49. You're listening to Ireland's first and only sports breakfast show, OTB AM. Keith Wood's going to join us next this morning to go through his Irish rugby depth chart in the front row. First, just a reminder, here's Stuart Barnes on last night's Off the Ball sharing some frank thoughts about CJ Stander and arguing that his name should not be anywhere near Andy Farrell's first choice 15.
The other thing is Stander. Stander, if you like, was another of the flag bearers of the last year of Joe Schmidt's management in that there's very little offloading. He carried a lot. He carried safely. He carried slowly. He carried securely. It was okay against a weak team like Scotland, against a faster team like Ireland, Japan. It unravelled against New Zealand. It left Ireland looking just so ponderous. So I think Ireland, again, they've got to decide, what do they want to do? Do they want to carry on like Smith, and do they want to play a conservative keep ball game? Or do they want to try and utilise talent of men like Lama in the field and break it open a bit, get Ringrose into the game? And I think if you do that, then whilst, yes, there are question marks about Doris and Deegan, of course there are. There are always question marks about young blokes before they wear an international shirt. But the way they play is far more suited to an Ireland team who want to accelerate the way they're trying to play. CJ Stander applies the brakes.
OK, well, that's interesting, because, I mean, we're not quite sure what to expect from Farrell yet, quite clearly. And do you not think Stander could be coached somehow? And maybe it's late in the day to say that, Stuart, but encourage maybe is the better way of putting it, to offload more, to take the ball less into contact.
I don't think so. I mean, he's not a giant. He's not an amazing athlete for forward. You know, he's a lump, and he's solid, and he's organised, and he does what he does very, very well. But it's utterly without ambition.
Yeah, the rest of that is he'll make tackles, but he won't make lasting tackles. He's a glue player. So very strong stuff last night on Off the Ball from Stuart Barnes about what really the team selection needs to be to show us the style that Andy Farrell wants to be, to show us who Andy Farrell's team is going to be. And it's funny, we were talking about this on Friday with Brian O'Driscoll, and it's worth checking out on our YouTube channel. He was saying that there's a very short period of time where Andy Farrell gets to instigate what it is that he's doing. Yeah. Because if he gets it wrong at the start and then he changes midstream, everybody's like, oh, you're only changing because we told you to change, because there was a backlash against it. So what do you do?
In a way, is it not a good thing that Scotland is up first? It's like a game that will be perceived as one of the easier.
And think about that.
Six Nations.
So what do you do?
Like, that's the thing.
If you put the young lads in and they lose, you'll be like, oh, look at this, he can't take the job. If you put the out lads in and they lose, it's like, what are you doing? So a bit damned if you do and damned if you don't.
I think so. It's not the most amazing opening fixture. I think we're getting, if we were in a solid place, perhaps it would be, but there's a lot of unknown. Right,
we've got Keith Wood with us this morning. Keith, good morning to you. How you doing?
Morning, gentlemen. How are you?
Yeah, very strong stuff from Stuart Barnes there, saying that Ireland need to move on from CJ Stander. He called the team ponderous. He said it would be, picking him again would be a hangover, essentially, from the Joe Schmidt era. Do you agree with this?
No, I don't, actually. It's funny. I think in light of how we've played in the World Cup, I think we need to take one little bit of reflection from it, and this is where the interesting element will be for me. It's much easier for a larger country to throw out everybody when there's a change that happens. We need to be a little bit more circumspect. But I would like to see him play better, and I'd like to see him play differently. And so I tend not to take the scalpel out quite as quickly as others might want to. So I'm really interested to see what Andy Farrell does with the squad. I'm interested to see with how he wants them to play. Because I would look back, and you'll remember I would have been critical of Jamie Heaslip towards the end of his time with Ireland, because I felt he started playing in a fairly stodgy fashion. And I remember what he played like in 2009 in the Lions. And he was a remarkable ball-running number 8 who would sit back into the spot and used to have huge carries. And then suddenly, 4 or 5 years later, he was carrying for less than a metre on average. So CJ has done almost exactly the same thing. And whether that's reflective of a job that a coach wants you to do, and you'll do whatever the coach says, by the way. If he says, this is the job I want you to do, and I want you to be able to take up the short truck yards so that we can go through several phases. Well, your job is to do what your coach tells you to do. That is the job. I'm just wondering to see whether that's the best use of him and whether we can get him back. And so that's the first point. My second point is I still believe, and if I look through last weekend and I watched the Munster game on the television, recorded and watched it when I got home, the Munster guys that had been on the Lions and even some of the Irish guys that had been on the Lions have played nothing but rugby since. And I thought they all looked a little bit tired, and I will say that I think a lot of the performances of those players have still been very good, but haven't been at the heights that they've been. So I'm looking forward to them getting a rest at some stage post Six Nations.
Yeah, even post Six Nations, then there's a tour to Australia next summer, so it's going to be a while before we actually end up seeing those all have a couple of months off properly to let the body and the mind heal. So.
Well, I have an issue. I have an issue with summer tours immediately after World Cups. I've said that for a long time. There needs to be one gap in the calendar in a summer, be it after a Lions tour or after a World Cup. You need to be able to give the guys some level of a rest. We talk about player welfare, but player welfare isn't about playing your best players every minute of every day until they run out of steam.
Exactly. Let's come back to that, because it might feed in a little bit to the depth chart of the front row. And I know you've got a little bit of concern about the age profile of our front row at the moment, Keith.
Well, I do. It's just in terms of maybe keeping some of the players there longer than they would traditionally be kept is maybe the nicest way to put it. But I do in some spots, and I don't in other spots. When I look at in the tight head, our age profile in tight head, I've never seen anything like it in my life. It's fantastic. It's absolutely, and we have a level of depth there that I don't think we have had previously. It's the hardest position to get a world-class operator in, and we've plenty, which is Tadhg Furlong definitely at the start. Though I think he needs a rest. I find. I'm a front row forward, or has been front row forward. I get excited when you see players that are able to do many things. Yeah, he's 27 years of age, but he's fantastic. But he's played a huge amount of rugby. I just think we need that guy's like a national treasure, and we need to look after him. So behind him, a lot of young guys too.
On the Tadhg Furlong point, and going back to the Lions, and even to get into the Lions team, you obviously have to play to a very high level for the previous 6 months minimum, but Furlong had probably had a full year before that. So if you take us on that cycle all the way up to the next Lions tour, he's effectively on the treadmill. And at that point, it's a Lions tour, another Lions tour, a World Cup in between, and every Six Nations game, and every big game for Leinster. At some point, again, we've had this conversation repeatedly over the last decade about players. Somebody like him, do you not just say, go off and have 6 months and do whatever you want?
Well, again, it's one of my few regrets that I decided I had to retire because my body was just gone. And it was gone. And I look back in it 17 years later now, which is a bit of a shock, and say that would it have lasted any bit longer if I'd taken a bit of time out? Truthfully, at that stage, I don't think so. But for these players who are incredibly well managed medically, we've seen it in other countries. We've seen it in Australia to give a guy a bit of time off, to New Zealand, to Australia, to South Africa, or go away and just get a different experience, have a bit of fun in Japan, earn money, do well, get away from the huge pressure. That's a hard thing for us to do. So I don't know that we're necessarily geared up for that. But what I would say for someone like with Tadhg Furlong is a summer off that's enough. It isn't as if we're trying to say, let's take 2 years off, because I don't know that that's necessarily right either, because your body tends to fall apart the second you stop. And I know that from my own experience. But I think he's played. I used to always have a bit of a theory that there are only so many big periods of time under which you could play. So there's only so many Lions tours, Six Nations, summer tours, big campaigns that get you to finals. They're fantastic, but they take a huge amount out of you. He's one of the most successful guys that's worn the jersey, and he did it very young. So I'd still like him there in 4 years' time, absolutely delivering because he has that capacity. But I do think he's getting a rest, as in a week off, but it's almost like an existential tiredness. And I'm not saying for him per se. I actually think for our main players of the last 6 or 7 years, I think there's a level of fatigue. And this isn't fitness, and it's nothing like that at all. It's just they've had to dip into the well very deep all the time. And unless you're putting something back in there, your capacity diminishes.
Even allowing for that then, Keith, how close is Andrew Porter to actually displacing Tadhg Furlong at the moment? I presume he is your number 2 in that position.
He is, and I don't know that he's... I actually don't know that he's necessarily pushing him out of the spot. I actually love the fact the two of them are there, because I think they're incredibly supportive to each other in actually the manner in how they play, and that level of trust factor that you can have, so that Tadhg says, well, I can go off after 50 minutes. I don't have to wait till 65 minutes, because the guy that's going to come on is going to be totally clued in and do a great job. I think Porter still has to learn. And I still would like to mind that young fella too. You know, he's only 23 years of age. So, you know, you want these guys to play for another 10 years. Well, for Andrew anyway.
Who's after Andrew Porter?
Andrew Porter, at the present moment in time, for me, it's John Ryan. I think Marty Moore has come back. And he's doing, he's doing pretty well, but I'd like to see him fitter.
Yeah.
Keenan Knox, the young South African in Munster who's been there, has, again, at 21 years of age. He is a guy for the future, definitely. It's very hard to say that when you see a young guy to how good he's going to be, but he has shown elements of being incredibly good. And the only issue I would say and it's funny because it almost counteracts the initial conversation, when you're trying to learn your craft as a front row forward, you have to play games. I'd rather they were playing AIL games, anything. You just learn how to deal with different players, different people who do different things. You can do everything you want in the gym. You can do everything on a training field, but it's what happens in the white heat of a big scrummaging game. And you'll play even in AIL levels, you play against guys that their only thing worth doing in life for them is scrummaging. You'll learn an awful lot if you're 20 years of age in that instance. Yeah,
it's funny, we don't really have that outlet that often for players who are full-time professionals.
We do have that outlet. We don't use it. Sure.
Should we? I mean, that's essentially what you're saying, is we should be giving and we should be belching these players back into the IAL system. I suppose then you've got the issue of like full-time professional athletes up against amateurs who are training twice a week and working the rest of the week, and then they're in the scrum. And there's safety issues around that, are there?
There are safety issues around it. Look, the AIL at the present moment in time is not necessarily fit for purpose. Because if you look at what's happening, some of the provinces, Leinster in particular, are churning out huge amounts of talented young guys. They need to play. They need to play somewhere. Some of them go a little bit later. Like we would talk, that we say the schools is the be-all and end-all. But look, I played very little schools rugby, if I'm honest. I managed to get onto the national scene because of play that I had with Gary Owen. So I have a soft spot for that because I think it's a conduit to it. And some people mature slightly older, later, different, and we need to get the best out of all of them.
Yeah, no, it's definitely part of the puzzle that's missing. Let's talk about hooker. Pre-Christmas, Ronan Kelleher's form was sensational, certainly at the very start of the season, but injury has just taken the hype and the heat away from calls for his selection at the moment. So who do you think is the number one hooker in Ireland at the moment, and who do you think will actually be the selection for the game against Scotland?
For me, this one is a quandary, and the reason this is a quandary is that neither Niall Scanlon, Sean Cronin, or Rob Herring pushed Rory Best for a selection in the World Cup. It never happened, and Rory had fair few bad games in the last 18 months, and yet none of the other guys have risen to that level. Since then, they still haven't. So I think an awful lot of the chat for for Ronan Kelleher is coming out there is because he's offering something different, and there's a bit of excitement around him. And the other guys are good players, but you're always looking for something great, so that's why there's an excitement around him. So for me, as it stands at the present moment in time, Niall Scannell is number one. Rob Herring is number two. Sean Cronin is number three. But there's very, very, very little between any of them. And I wish that they'd up their game. So they have to grab this jersey. It's almost as if they're waiting for it to be given to them. They need to grab it. They need to start having performances. I'm not sure about Kelleher's injury, and the only reason I mentioned him again in this was it's 20 years ago now, when 25 years ago, when Jeremy Paul, who was this incredibly athletic Australian, had been a flanker, moved into the front row, was a really, really good rugby player. Technically wasn't up to scratch. And what they actually did, Australia, was they picked Michael Foley for about 20 minutes for 4 or 5 tests to kind of take the sting out of the test, and then they brought Jeremy Paul in. And it was to be seen as Jeremy Paul was going to be the guy to lead the light for the next 10 years. And the truth of it is he didn't. He got too many injuries and it didn't work for him. But the knock-on effect for it was they put Michael Foley in as the senior citizen, whose job was there to take the sting out of the tail and help deliver for the young guy. But Foley became a much better hooker because of it, and actually stayed an awful lot longer. It almost felt as if by him having to half coach the next guy in, he became a better player too. He thought about his game more, but he ended up with a fantastic end of his career. So I wonder whether there's that situation could happen with someone like Ronan Kelleher.
So, like 20 minutes into a game, you're subbing off your hooker. Does that look like it's, you'd need to explain to everybody what's going on in advance within the camp, so they're not thinking, oh, well, that's a humiliation. You're getting the shepherd's hook after 20 minutes.
You're getting the best you can out of the players that you have at your disposal. Why wouldn't you try and do that? And look, it doesn't. I'm not saying that that's what they have to do, but I'm saying we need to look at whether we have a guy that's in his 30s or late 20s. Late 20s are a great time for a hooker. But if we have a guy there, do we have a young guy coming through as well? And it's whether it's in this match or in some of those matches. But I'd like to, you have to reward guys that do something a bit different, that are a bit better. And there is a bit of a changing of the guard here. Yeah. So I think those things are possible.
Ronan Kelleher broke his hand against Northampton, and at the time, so this was the 10th of December, they said he'd be out 4 to 6 weeks. So we should be seeing some reports this week about how close or otherwise he is to getting back. If he gets back and gets some game time, can you stick him straight in alongside Cian Healy and alongside Tyke Furlong, like players he's familiar with? Can you pitch somebody that young in to start at hooker against Scotland?
No, I don't think so, because he's been injured, actually. But I do think you can put him on the bench a couple of weeks after that. It just sees how he's getting back into it. If you had people who are stand-out guaranteed starters, I don't think you'd be having this conversation. You'd be looking after him a little bit more. But look, I just think it's an interesting conversation to have. So it's the start of a new era. Are we looking for guys that are we going to try and get a bit of a balance right between age and experience and some of these young Turks that are coming through, and maybe that they're very capable or not? And you won't really know until they get a chance. But it doesn't have to be the be all and end all. So it can be part of the process. And I remember Tyke Furlong getting a game with Ireland and having a pretty hard time of it, because he hadn't played at that level. Yeah. It's going to be hard anyway. It's front row is very, very tough, huge pressure. But I think you have to start at some stage.
So the order is Niall Scannell 1, Rob Herring 2 at the moment?
I think so.
Okay. To go on to loose heads, is Cian Healy still the number 1?
Cian Healy still at number 1. For me, it's Cian Healy, Dave Kilcoyne, Jack McGrath still. I've loved McGrath's reaction to leaving Leinster to being out of the Ireland squad, I just think he started playing again recently. And there are a few young guys at Loosehead. There are a few younger guys coming through, but not a huge number either. So when Cian Healy and Kilcoyne and McGrath are all 30 plus. So we do need a couple of young guys coming through.
Definitely. Is McGrath one of those people you'd categorise in that area as well, Keith? Somebody who probably needed a break. It's a little bit too late now, but obviously post the Lions tour, we haven't seen that same level from Jack McGrath.
Well, I think the Lions tours, and it's funny because I almost sound as if I'm criticising them. I love them. I think they are of unbelievable value. But it's been marginalised a little by being squeezed into a smaller period of time, by the season ending the day before the tour, starting almost the day after the tour. And we're not giving the players an element of rest that fits into it. And it doesn't have to be immediately afterwards, but it can be at different times. You learn an awful lot from it, and you actually accelerate your learning very heavily on a Lions tour, and that's why it's great. But it does take a toll. As do World Cups, by the way. The World Cup isn't the 4 or 5 weeks that Ireland are out in Japan. It's the amount of work that has to do to get in there. And look, it didn't work for us this time either. So there's also a bit of a psychological blow from that. And I'm just saying, for some of the guys that are carrying the weight. So I go back to those guys. Johnny Sexton being another one of them. The players that have carried the mantle of Ireland and their province for 6, 7, 10 years. They carry that every time they step onto the field. And yes, that's why they get paid the big bucks, and that's why they play professional sport. But it doesn't take away from the fact that it's tiring.
Last question for you then, Keith, on the front row. Are you positive about where we are at the moment, or is it a bit of a mixed bag?
I'd be more positive if more guys are putting their hand up at hooker. But invariably, I looked at a depth chart from a few years ago, and we were very, very, very bare then. Yeah. I don't think we are as bare since. And look, I know, like Munster struggling at the weekend in the last 10 minutes of that game, and all those sort of things, and people get caught up in all the emotion of everything. But I know that if you look into even the Munster setup, the players that are coming through in that, you've young Josh Wycherley, who's only 21 as a loosehead coming through the system. There are a next layer of guys that are coming in. We just haven't seen a huge amount of them on the field. We'd like to see them a little bit more, and be it at AIL level, be it at Pro 14 level, whatever it is, to try and get them through. But those kids are there. So because of that, I'm not that worried by it.
All right. Keith, great stuff. Thanks a million for joining us this morning.
Brilliant. Cheers, gents.
It's Keith Wood giving us his depth chart. That's the first one that we've done for you. We'll move on to the second row and back row in the next few days, and we'll wrap up with the backs over the next couple of weeks as well, in advance of the Six Nations. More details beginning to emerge over the next 24, 48 hours from the Ireland camp. Some speculation that Marty Moore may be released from the Ireland squad. Was that the...
It was certainly mentioned in the newspapers this morning that it would be harsh and perhaps at a bad time for him. So perhaps the piece is written with the idea that he's in line to face the Axe all right, but we don't know. There's no leaked report anyway.
12 minutes past 9 this morning on OTB AM.